For this segment, we want to talk about color and get an idea of how color works, how we can manipulate it, and how it manipulates the audience. So for our discussions, let's look at the general color wheel. We've all looked at one of these before, and we all identify this as a spectrum in which color lives. The primary colors, we understand those. We know the secondary colors. And most of the other colors are all tertiary. And the color wheel can get rather large when we start mixing in all the possible tertiaries there are. We also have discussed in other presentations that the center of the color wheel is gray because if we mix any color together, we wind up with the center color, that of gray. Let's talk about color relations, because that's important to us in how colors affect one another in the process of deciding the color palette we're going to use for a show. Analogous refers to colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So in this case, we're showing red and red-orange, and then red-lavender, and showing that because they're next to each other, these analogous colors can give an different kind of effect. For this production, we see Charles Corley did a costume design that was fairly close in relationship with some of the major characters. So these three ladies live very close to each other, have close relationship in the way we're supposed to perceive them as an audience member, and therefore he placed them in analogous colors. Another combination we want to talk about is complementary colors. We've come across this also in a previous lecture. Colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel are complementary colors. Spelled with an E, please. C-O-M-P-L-E-M-E-N-T. If we place them next to each other, they enhance one another. If we physically mix them together, then they tone each other down and work toward that center gray of the color wheel. Here's an example of a costume design for the Threepenny Opera by Pat Campbell, in which he colored the main costume in a green color and then used red as the accent. You'll notice how these two colors play off of each other to help boost the overall effect. Here's a lighting design. For this production, we see that his set design was mainly neutrals with a lot of metallics, so the lighting really caused much of the effect of what was going on. In this example, we see lavender and gold that are complementary colors, and therefore because they are next to each other, it only enhances one another in the full effect. Triad colors. If we look at three colors that are equal distant on the color wheel, we're working with a triad. This is another way of finding colors that punch each other. Just like complementaries do if you place them side by side, triad colors tend to also punch one another. Here's a great example of a costume design for M. Butterfly, in which we have the triad colors of the kind of blue-green and the lavender and the gold, and how each one, if you look at each color, it has a lot of power in itself because of the other two triad members that punch it when we look at the overall design. Split complement refers to selecting a color, such as yellow in this example, and then instead of picking the complement itself, finding the two analogous colors. So here we have yellow, and then we have that hot pink kind of color and a blue-purple kind of color. This is a split complement. So rather than make it too obvious that we are going with a complementary look, we will use a split complement. Split complements were used a lot in the makeup designs for cats. We'll see in this example that Napier selected kind of an orange color to accent, a yellow kind of orange, and that tertiary color then reached over and took its split complements of kind of a blue and a little bit more of a pinkish red kind of color in its overall look and effect. This is a great example in lighting design in which the set, again that was fairly neutral, allowed the lighting designer to do some split complementary work by allowing that kind of yellow overall kind of cast major character highlights within the major acting areas, and then picked those up in the accent colors of the split complements in that hot pink and the lavenders that were used behind and around and on all the edges. A family refers to a color, its complement, and then the four analogous colors. So we could say it is red, and its two analogous colors, hot pink and that red orange, and then all three complements. So that's another way to state the same thing. It's simply three colors opposite each other on the color wheel, making a total of 6. This can be a very effective way of putting groups together, as we saw in that first picture, in which we had 3 ladies that we wanted to make closely related. And in this image, you'll see that a lot of the characters in the background are placed in analogous colors, and then other people within the color scheme are based in the color range on the opposite side of the color wheel. So you'll see lots of warm characters in their analogous colors, and then you'll see cool costumes in the complementary analogous colors. Now let's understand a little bit about how we control color, and therefore how we can best represent color and use it effectively in the designs we have. On a general color wheel, let's remember that a color wheel is actually a split open round object. So let's consider it an orange that has been sliced open. The colors are around the equator of that circle. If we complete the circle, we'll remember that black is at the southern pole and white is at the north pole. If we mix those together, we know we're going to get to gray. That re-emphasizes the fact that gray is at the center of the wheel. Now, one of the first controllable qualities of color is hue. And when we looked at the wheel, we saw that red is a hue and blue is a hue. We can change the hues simply by moving them up and down in the sphere. If we add white at the top, we'll get the high value. Tint is the addition of white. If we mix in opposition black to the color, we'll pull it down into the shade, which is the addition of black. So, pulling colors up and down creates the value of the color. Value is also one of the controllable qualities. We often use value to create what we call monochromatic colors, taking one color, mixing it with white and black in varying degrees, one simple color, one chroma, as it were. Here's an example of a costume using red and its variations to create a costume design. And here's a scenic design that uses the ranges of blues from the darkest blues to the lightest blues. Chroma is the third quality that we can change in color. Chroma refers to the brightness of color, its purity. Its highest chroma is at the equator, around the outside of that sliced open orange. But as we move towards the center and start toning it down, we are getting towards the center, where the gray color is. If I took lavender and mixed in some yellow, I would wind up with a toned version of that lavender color. Pastels, by definition, just for your information, is the idea of toning a color and then adding black and white. So pastels can be light in their tinted versions or dark in their shaded versions. Once we've understood how to manipulate color a little bit, let's talk about color balance within a design and what that might say to an audience. First of all, here's full vivid color. We don't want to always work in full vivid color. In fact, we might choose to select a mother color. That is a color that we will add to all the other colors to tone them, to pull them all into one palette range, you might say. This happens rather naturally in our real world because the natural light color within a room or outside dominates and becomes the mother color of all other colors. Here's an example of mother color. Artists on canvas use mother color quite frequently. So every color within this palette was mixed with one common color. And you'll notice there's a nice golden undertone to everything in this picture because gold was mixed into all the other colors as the mother color. Let's talk about the color palette now. As we choose the palette, we know that we can mix colors into it to control them. But let's also talk about how a palette works in communication with an audience. Here's a wide palette. If we used every one of these colors, that would be a fairly wide palette. And the effect in a wide palette is, well, first of all, lots of color, but lots of possibilities because there is such a range. We sit back and enjoy and allow the possibilities to begin. A close palette would suggest that we have eliminated color choices. In this selection, we're using 3 colors. Note they're analogous colors. They are in the warm range. Here's a possible cool close palette, which we've selected 4 colors. Again, all analogous to one another and therefore closely related, but we've slanted the palette to one side in the cool range. Here's another close palette. It's a mixed palette. We're still not using all the color range, but we're doing a family of colors. So we're selecting 3 colors on one side of the wheel and 3 colors on the other side of the wheel. The overall effect is that if we tend to use a close palette, we're usually saying to an audience there's a message here. We've chosen to kind of slant our view of this world and give you only one perspective. Therefore, there's probably a message involved. A wider palette generally says to us to sit back, relax, and enjoy. Here's an example using the last range that we talked about, a close opposite palette. So for this production of Midsummer Night's Dream, we see that the supernatural characters are all in kind of cool ranged colors as they are in the top left, and that the human characters are in the warm tones on the opposite side of the wheel. Last in our discussion of balance is let's talk about color carding. If we were to look at a simple design and pull all of its colors out and balance them to say how much of each color we used, kind of like the ingredients in your cereal, we would come down to what is called color carding. The term comes from the fact that artists will use a index card and actually paint it in the range of color that they would like, and then use that card as an overall influence in their design. Now, let's take the fact that we're going to use only 3 colors, it doesn't matter what they are, but if we evenly balance them, it tends to be artificial, and that's why it's farcical, because it's abnormally kind of humorous, we might say. Jesters and clowns tend to dress in farcical balance of palette colors. Here's an example from As You Like It, in which the color card is fairly well even balanced between all these nice warm colors. In comedy, we might tend to pick one dominant color and then let the accent colors evenly balance themselves out. Here's a comedic costume in which we've chosen a nice deep maroon for a major color and then accented that with the balance of some other colors. It tends to be more dramatic or more realistic, we might say, to pick a major color and then a stronger accent color and then some supernumerary colors. So again, in the 3 color theory, here would be a card, color card, for a more dramatic costume. For this costume design for the Misanthrope, Ann Roth chose to select blue as a major color and then that kind of bluish white as a secondary color and then some supernumerary colors. I cut this down into only 3, again sticking to just the 3 color theory. We'll note that in comparison, as we stay high on the scale of comedy and high farce, we would tend to balance the colors a little more. They're a little more artificial. And as we move down the scale to the dramatic, we tend to select perhaps a major color and then accent colors. But the balance is the major key. So here's an example of the same costume design. If we look on the left, though it's scattered all over the body, there's a fairly even distribution of the colors in balance within the entire design, so that we are becoming rather farcical. We understand this is probably not reality. As we move into the comedic, things might balance out a little bit more. We do note that then the accent colors are smaller. In the dramatic variation, we have even less balance. We have a dominant color, and then we have an accent color, and then we have some supernumerary colors. Please note that in all these designs, the hair color is part of the design and plays into the way it works within the design itself. Most of us tend to dress this way. One dominant color. Today I'm going to wear blue. And then we find a nice strong accent, and then we throw on our watch and our shoes and our socks and our hat, and our hair color is already there. And so we get lots of supernumerary color at the very end. This is a more natural way of wearing clothing, and therefore it's more dramatic or more believable, you might say, more realistic. So this was a way for us to discuss color and a concept of how we might use color, how we might balance color, how we might manipulate color in making statements to the audience of the kind of show that we have, the kind of characters that we have, and the overall effect of what we want color to say to an audience.